The morning sun cast long shadows across the human settlement on Terra Nova when something extraordinary happened. A figure appeared at the main gate, moving with unsteady steps that caught the attention of the guards immediately. This wasn't like any visitor they had seen before. Ambassador Lyra of the Villani Collective barely managed to stay upright as she approached the settlement. Her body, made entirely of living crystal, showed terrible damage. Cracks ran across her translucent skin like spider webs, and the natural glow that should have emanated from within was flickering weakly. She looked like a beautiful sculpture that someone had tried to destroy. The guards called for Commander Jake Morrison right away. Jake had been running this frontier settlement for 5 years, and he had seen many strange things in that time, but nothing quite like this. The Villani were known throughout the galaxy as the most peaceful species anyone had ever encountered. They built cities that sang with the wind and created art that could make grown soldiers cry with its beauty. Violence was completely foreign to them. When Jake arrived with his senior staff, including Captain Lisa Rodriguez, they found Lyra struggling to communicate. Her people didn't speak with words like humans did. Instead, they created music with their voices, and somehow that music became language. Even in her damaged state, her voice carried melodies that seemed to touch something deep in the human soul. Commander Morrison, she sang, and her voice trembled like a broken bell. My people are dying. The Korthok Empire has found us, and they are taking everything we are. Jake had heard of the Korthok. They were an insect-like species that conquered worlds for resources and slaves. But the Villani lived in a remote part of the galaxy, far from the usual trade routes. How had the Korthok even found them? Lyra seemed to read his thoughts. They discovered our natural abilities, she explained, her musical voice growing stronger with urgency. We can amplify energy naturally. It's how we power our cities, how we create our art. But the Korthok, they want to use this ability to make their weapons more powerful. The crystal being's form shimmered as she accessed a data device embedded in her arm. A holographic display appeared in the air between them, and what it showed made every human present go silent. The images were almost too horrible to process. Korthak soldiers, looking like giant armored beetles, were systematically destroying Villani settlements. But this wasn't just conquest. This was something far worse. The insect warriors were stepping on Villani children, crushing their crystal forms underfoot like they were nothing more than pretty rocks. Entire cities that had once sung with life now stood silent, their crystal structures dark and lifeless. They don't even see us as alive, Lyra continued, her voice breaking into discordant notes that spoke of pure grief. To them, we are just tools to be harvested. Our children, our elders, our artists, they mean nothing. The Korthok take our strongest and hook them up to machines, forcing them to amplify weapon systems until their bodies shatter from the strain. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had seen war before, had fought in conflicts where good people died for important reasons, but this was different. This was the systematic extinction of an entire species whose only crime was being too gentle to defend themselves. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, her face pale but determined. How many worlds have they taken? 17 of our 23 home systems, Lyra replied. In each one, they leave nothing behind except silence. My own family. ... Her voice trailed off into a sound like wind chimes in a storm. The ambassador straightened up despite her injuries, drawing on some inner strength that impressed the humans watching. We had nowhere else to turn, and we heard whispers, stories told by traders and refugees. Stories about the Deathworlders. Jake knew that term. It's what most of the galaxy called humans, though usually not to their faces. Earth was considered one of the most dangerous planets anyone had ever discovered, a world where everything tried to kill you, where the weather could destroy entire cities, where the very air was poison to most species. The fact that humans had not only survived, but thrived on such a world made other species nervous. We heard that humans understand survival, Lyra continued. That you fight not just for yourselves, but for others who cannot fight. Please, Commander Morrison, teach my people how to defend themselves, or watch us disappear forever. Admiral Mike Thompson was deep in sleep when his secure communication device started screaming at 3 in the morning. After 30 years in the Terran Defense Force, he had learned that calls at this hour never brought good news. He rolled out of bed in his quarters aboard the flagship Defiance, pulled on his uniform, activated the transmission. What he saw on the screen made his blood run cold. The images from Volani space were beyond anything he had witnessed in decades of military service. Crystal beings who looked like living art were being systematically destroyed by insect-like creatures that treated them like objects rather than living people. Thompson had to pause the footage twice just to process what he was seeing. The Volani were known throughout human space as the galaxy's artists and philosophers. Their crystal cities created music that could be heard from orbit, and their people lived in perfect harmony with their surroundings. They had never hurt anyone in recorded history. They didn't even have a word for murder in their language before Thompson could fully process the horror of what he was watching. His communications officer burst into his quarters without knocking. Lieutenant David Baker looked like he had been running, his usually neat uniform disheveled, and his face flushed with excitement and anger. "Admiral, you need to see this right now," Baker said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "We're getting reports from across human space. Something's happening." Thompson followed Baker to the command center, where the main display showed a real-time map of human territory. Dozens of red dots were moving, each one representing a ship or fleet that had suddenly changed course. All of them were heading in the same direction, sir. "We have confirmation of at least 12 independent battle groups that have broken formation and are converging on Volani space," Baker reported, his fingers flying over his control panel. "These aren't military units, Admiral. These are civilian cargo haulers, mining ships, even passenger liners. They're converting themselves into troop transports as they travel." Thompson stared at the display in amazement. No official orders had been given. No government had declared war, yet somehow across the vast distances of human space, ordinary people were dropping everything to help a species most of them had never even met. How did they find out? Thompson asked, though. Part of him already knew the answer. "The footage is spreading through civilian networks faster than we can track it," Baker replied. "Someone leaked the ambassador's plea from Terra Nova. Now it's on every data stream, every communication channel. People are calling it Operation Glass Shield." Thompson watched more dots appear on the map. A mining operation near the Rim Worlds had apparently converted their entire fleet of heavy haulers into makeshift warships. A passenger cruise line had rerouted 3 luxury ships and was advertising for volunteers with military experience. Even the notorious smuggler crews were joining up, bringing their fast ships and knowledge of hidden jump routes.
"Out, sir, Captain."
Rachel Kim from the cargo vessel Morning Star is requesting permission to join the fleet, Baker continued. She says her crew voted unanimously to convert their ship. They're welding armor plating onto their hull as we speak. Something deep in Thompson's chest began to burn. It was the same feeling he had experienced as a young soldier when he first saw footage of Earth's natural disasters. The same protective fury that had driven humanity to not just survive their deadly homeworld, but to thrive on it. Humans had learned long ago that when something beautiful and innocent was threatened, you didn't wait for permission to act. The Korthok had made a serious mistake, Thompson told his assembled staff, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. They decided to hurt something that can't fight back, something that creates beauty instead of destruction. Every human in the galaxy is going to hear about this, and they're going to remember why we became the species that refuses to give up. Within the next 3 hours, the situation escalated beyond anything in recorded history. Volunteer fleets were forming at every major human hub. Retired military officers were coming out of civilian life to offer their services. Engineering crews were working around the clock to convert civilian vessels into combat platforms. Message spreading through human space was simple and powerful. Someone broke the crystal singers. By the time the sun rose on Earth, the largest volunteer armada in human history was already moving toward Volani space. No government had authorized it, no military command had ordered it. It was happening because humans had seen something beautiful. being destroyed, and their response was as natural as breathing. The Deathworld war machine was waking up, and the galaxy was about to remember why humans were feared. Colonel Lisa Wong stepped off the transport ship onto the crystal surface of the Vellani homeworld and immediately realized everything she thought she knew about warfare was about to change. She had spent 20 years training soldiers from dozens of different species across the galaxy. She had worked with tough miners from asteroid colonies, disciplined troops from high-gravity worlds, and even reformed pirates who brought their own unique brand of chaos to organize combat. But the Vellani were unlike anything she had ever encountered. The beings that approached her landing site moved like living music. Their crystalline bodies caught the light of their twin suns and scattered it in patterns that seemed to dance. Even in their fear and desperation, they moved with a grace that made Lisa feel clumsy in her standard military gear. These were artists, philosophers, and dreamers who had never needed to think about violence because their entire civilization was built on cooperation and beauty. Lisa's first meeting with the Vellani leadership took place in what they called a harmony chamber, a circular room where the walls themselves seemed to sing softly. The Vellani elder, a being named Kira, whose crystal form showed the deep blue colors of great age, approached with obvious nervousness. "Colonel Wong," Kira sang in her musical voice, "we are grateful for your arrival, but we must be honest with you. We do not understand violence. Our bodies are fragile compared to yours. We cannot tell lies or practice deception because our very communication is based on harmonic truth. How can beings like us ever become soldiers?" Lisa studied the assembled Vellani, seeing the way they unconsciously synchronized their movements, how their voices created complex harmonies, even in casual conversation. An idea began to form in her mind, something that went against every traditional military training manual she had ever read. "Maybe you can't become human soldiers," Lisa said slowly. "But that doesn't mean you can't become warriors in your own way." She immediately called General Mark Stevens on a secure communication link. Stevens was commanding the overall human response from his flagship, and Lisa knew he was expecting regular reports on training progress. "General, we need to completely rethink our approach here," Lisa explained. Watching as a group of young Vellani practice moving in perfect unison, without any apparent communication between them. These beings have abilities we barely understand. They don't just communicate with sound, they can create vibrations that affect the physical world around them. Over the next several days, Lisa worked closely with Kira and other Vellani to understand exactly what they were capable of. What she discovered amazed even her experienced team of military engineers. The Vellani didn't just make music, they could focus sound waves with precision that defied human understanding of physics. Their natural harmonies could resonate through solid matter, finding the exact frequency needed to make different materials vibrate, crack, or even shatter completely. During one demonstration, Kira showed Lisa how a group of 12 Vellani could sing together and cause a thick metal plate to develop stress fractures within seconds. The sound wasn't loud or harsh. It was actually quite beautiful, but the effect on the metal was devastating. "Your people have been thinking about this all wrong," Lisa told a gathering of frightened Vellani volunteers. "You keep trying to become something you're not. But your strength doesn't come from being like humans or any other warrior species. Your strength comes from being exactly what you are." Working with Dr. Patricia Chen, Lisa's chief science officer, they began developing entirely new tactics that used Vellani abilities as the foundation rather than trying to overlay human military doctrine. Dr. Chen was fascinated by the way Vellani could coordinate their actions through harmonic frequencies that were barely detectable to human ears. "They're not just singing together," Dr. Chen explained to Lisa during one of their planning sessions. "They're creating a shared consciousness through sound. When they work in groups, they literally think as one mind while maintaining their individual personalities. No human military unit has ever achieved that level of coordination." The breakthrough came when they tested Vellani harmonic abilities against captured Korthok equipment. The insect warriors used armor made from a chitinous material that was incredibly tough against conventional weapons. But when the Vellani focused their songs on it, the armor began to resonate at its natural frequency, and simply fell apart. "This changes everything," Lisa reported to General Stevens. "We're not training the Volani to be human soldiers. We're teaching them to weaponize their natural gifts. In general, when they work together, they're more coordinated than any military unit I've ever seen." Training that followed was unlike anything in military history. Human engineers designed resonance amplifiers that could boost and focus Volani harmonic abilities. The crystal beings learned to direct their songs like precision weapons, finding the exact frequencies that could disable enemy equipment, shatter armor, or even disrupt the nervous systems of attacking Korthok soldiers. But perhaps most importantly, the Volani learned that they didn't need to stop being themselves to become effective warriors. They were becoming something entirely new, a fusion of their natural abilities with human tactical thinking that created a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The first real test of the Human-Volani alliance came at the edge of the Theta system, where Korthok supply ships were moving weapons and captured Volani prisoners toward the core worlds of their empire. Admiral Thompson positioned his flagship at what he thought was a safe distance to observe the battle, expecting to see a conventional engagement between his human forces and the enemy convoy. What actually happened defied everything he knew about space warfare. The Volani ships moved into formation with a grace that seemed almost like a dance. Their crystalline hulls caught starlight and reflected it in patterns that created an almost hypnotic display. But these weren't just pretty light shows. Thompson quickly realized that the Volani vessels were positioning themselves with mathematical precision, creating geometric patterns that had specific purposes he was only beginning to understand. When the battle began, the combined fleet didn't attack in the traditional sense of rapid-fire weapons and explosive missiles. Instead, the Volani ships began to sing. The sound traveled through space in ways that should have been impossible, carried by harmonic frequencies that resonated through the hulls of both friendly and enemy vessels. But while the human ships were designed to work with these vibrations, amplifying their weapon systems beyond their normal capabilities, the effect on the Korthok convoy was devastating. Thompson watched in amazement as his own ship's energy, weapons, which normally had a range of about 50,000 kilometers, suddenly reached out twice that distance with 3 times their usual power. The Volani weren't just fighting alongside the humans. They were making every human weapon more effective than its designers had ever dreamed possible. Captain Rodriguez, standing beside Thompson on the bridge, was staring at her tactical displays with an expression of pure wonder. "Admiral, our weapon efficiency readings are off the charts. The Volani harmonic amplification is boosting our output by 200%. But the real shock came when they saw what the Volani were doing to the enemy ships. The focused harmonic attacks weren't just damaging the Korthok vessels. They were literally taking them apart at the molecular level. The insect warrior's chitinous armor, which had proven nearly impervious to conventional weapons, began to vibrate at its natural frequency and simply cracked apart like eggshells. "Sir, you need to see this," called out Lieutenant Baker from his sensor station. His voice carried a mixture of amazement and something that might have been fear. "The Korthok ships aren't being destroyed by explosions or weapon impacts. They're falling apart. The harmonic frequencies are finding the resonant frequency of their hull materials and tearing them apart from the inside." Thompson focused on the main display and watched something that seemed more like art than warfare. The Volani songs created visible patterns in space, waves of energy that moved with purpose and intelligence. Where these waves touched enemy vessels, the ships didn't explode in flames and debris. Instead, they came apart in sections, their hull plating separating cleanly, as if someone was carefully dismantling them piece by piece. But perhaps most remarkable was the effect this had on his own crew. Hardened space marines who had seen decades of combat were openly weeping as they listened to the Volani war songs. The crystal beings had found a way to make their defensive battle beautiful, turning the grim necessity of warfare into something that touched the human soul at its deepest level. "My God," Rodriguez whispered, her voice filled with awe and something approaching reverence. "We didn't just teach them to fight. We taught them to remain true to themselves while becoming warriors. They're still artists, still creators of beauty, even while they're defending their people." The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted less than an hour. When it was over, the Korthok supply convoy had been completely neutralized, but not a single enemy soldier had been killed unnecessarily. The Volani had disabled their ships and systems with surgical precision, leaving the crews alive but completely helpless. Word of this engagement spread through Korthok space faster than their fastest ships could carry it. The Insect Empire had built their reputation on overwhelming force and brutal efficiency.
Ow.
They were used to enemies who fought with conventional weapons and tactics. They had no defense against an enemy that could turn their own ship hulls against them, while creating music so beautiful it made their opponents cry. Within days, reports began reaching Thompson from across the galaxy. Entire Korthok battle fleets were surrendering rather than face the combined human Volani forces. Some enemy commanders were abandoning strategic positions without even attempting to fight, terrified by stories of ships that came apart like puzzle pieces and warriors who killed with songs. The Deathworlders hadn't just protected another species. They had done something far more terrifying. They had taken a peaceful, artistic civilization and helped them become apex predators while keeping everything that made them special and unique. The galaxy was learning that humanity's most frightening ability wasn't their capacity for violence, but their talent for bringing out the best and most dangerous qualities in others. Retress. Korthok's Supreme Commander Vex sat in his command chamber aboard the massive war vessel Devastator, staring at reports that made no sense to his military mind. In less than 3 months, his empire had lost more territory than in the previous 50 years combined. Entire battle fleets were surrendering without firing a shot, and his commanders were sending increasingly desperate messages about enemies who fought with music and ships that fell apart like broken toys. The insect commanders. Chitinous armor clicked nervously as he paced. The Korthok Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds using overwhelming force and terror tactics. They had never encountered an enemy that could turn their own weapons against them while making the battle look like an art performance supreme. Commander, his tactical officer, buzzed through the translation device. Our forward scouts report that the Human Volani Alliance has completely cut off our supply lines to 17 systems. Our garrison forces are requesting immediate evacuation. Vex's compound eyes focused on the holographic display showing the current state of the war. Red markers indicated lost territories, yellow showed contested areas, and green represented secure Korthok holdings. The display was almost entirely red and yellow now, with only a small cluster of green markers near the Empire's core worlds. In his desperation, Vex decided to deploy the one weapon his scientists had been developing. In secret, deep in the research laboratories beneath his flagship, Korthok engineers had been working on a biological agent specifically designed to target crystalline lifeforms. The weapon used a viral frequency that would cause any crystal-based organism to shatter from within, spreading the destruction through harmonic resonance until every Volani in the galaxy would be dead within hours. Begin deployment of the Crystal Plague, Vex ordered, his translated voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Target every known Volani world simultaneously. We cannot defeat them in battle. We will eliminate them entirely. The Korthok Supreme Commander didn't realize was that humanity's reputation for paranoia and over-preparation wasn't just a rumor. Dr. Patricia Chen had been working with Volani scientists since the first day of the Alliance, developing countermeasures. For every conceivable threat, her team had identified the possibility of frequency-based biological weapons within weeks of beginning their partnership with the Crystal Beings. When the Korthok weapon activated across dozens of star systems, it encountered something unexpected. The Volani had modified their natural, harmonic abilities to create a defensive frequency that turned the bioweapon's own resonance against itself. Instead of shattering Volani crystal structures, the weapon created a feedback loop that neutralized its effects completely. But Dr. Chen had gone one step further. Her countermeasures didn't just block the weapon. They reversed its frequency and sent it back to its source. Every Korthok ship that had launched the Crystal Plague suddenly found its own chitinous armor beginning to crack and crumble. The bioweapon that was supposed to, in the war instead, crippled the Empire's remaining fleet. Supreme. Commander Vex watched in horror as his flagship's hull began to develop stress fractures. The same harmonic frequency that was meant to destroy. The Volani was now tearing apart his own vessel. Within minutes, the Devastator was breaking apart, and distress signals were coming in from across Korthok space. The war ended not with a final battle, but with a complete collapse of Korthok military capability. Their remaining forces, faced with the choice between surrender and death, chose to lay down their weapons. The empire that had terrorized dozens of species for centuries crumbled in a matter of days. But the humans in Volani didn't seek revenge. Instead, they did something that shocked the entire galaxy. They began rebuilding Korthok society from the ground up, establishing rehabilitation centers on former slave worlds where the insect warriors could learn cooperation instead of domination. Human teachers worked alongside Volani harmonists too. Show the Korthok that strength could come from creation rather than destruction. 6 months after the war's end, Ambassador Lyra stood before the Galactic Council alongside Admiral Thompson. The crystal being now bore scars from the conflict, but these marks had become part of her beauty. When stellar wind passed through the fractures in her crystalline form, they created haunting melodies that spoke of survival and hope. Representatives of the galaxy, Lyra sang, her voice joined by harmonics from Volani throughout the chamber. We stand here today to announce the formation of the Shepherd's Alliance. This partnership between humanity and the Volani Collective represents a new approach to galactic security. Admiral Thompson stepped forward, his weathered face showing the pride and determination that had driven humanity since their early days on Earth. Any species facing extinction or genocide will find us ready to help. We won't just fight for you. We'll teach you to fight for yourselves while keeping everything that makes you unique. The assembled delegates sat in stunned silence as they realized what they were witnessing. The humans hadn't just defeated the Korthok Empire. They had transformed a peaceful species into formidable warriors while preserving their essential nature. The Volani were still artists and philosophers, but now they were also protectors who could defend not just themselves, but others. The galaxy learned that day that humanity's most terrifying characteristic wasn't their ability to wage war, their talent for awakening the protective instincts in others. The Deathworld war machine hadn't just found new weapons. It had found its perfect harmony. The age of the Shepherd's Alliance had begun, and no species would ever face extinction alone again.